All right, the next question is from The Real AF, and it says the following, quote, "Hi, Glenn. It's fascinating to watch the success of Doge, what's being exposed with U.S. aid, etc., and two of Trump's most controversial picks, Tulsi and RFK, being confirmed. It does seem like we're headed for some sort of renaissance or course correction long overdue. I'm curious about your take on Chris Hedges' recent remarks about the empire self-destructing, which is the alternate way of viewing these events. Here is his first paragraph, quote, "The billionaires, Christian fascists, grifters, psychopaths, imbeciles, narcissists, and deviants who have seized control of Congress, the White House, and the courts are cannibalizing the machinery of the state. These are self-inflicted wounds characteristic of all late empires, which will cripple and destroy the tentacles of power. And then, like a house of cards, the empire will collapse." I do, without all of that invective that he put there, and I'm not sure why that's there, just leaving that question to the side for the moment, I do think that a lot of what's happening is through necessity. The reality is that this American empire is unsustainable. I'm not somebody who thinks the minute the United States government has a deficit or even debt, that's kind of apocalyptic. It is not the same, and I've never accepted the analogy that just like a family has to balance their budget, so too do governments. Governments can use debt financing and have for lots of different reasons, but that doesn't mean there aren't limits on them. And if you look at the debt of the United States and what is required to be serviced, just the interest payments alone, and then you lay on top of that the trillions and trillions of dollars that we've spent on foreign wars all over the place, it is obvious that that needs to be reined in. Even if you're morally supportive of it, even if you think it's strategically advantageous, it's simply not sustainable. The United States cannot continue to sustain the level of debt that it has and the policies that generate that. So I think a lot of what Trump is reacting to and a lot of what Elon Musk is doing is almost an inevitable recognition that there has to be a radical course correction. But at the same time, I think it's an important course correction. I do not think that American empire has been good for the world. And often the argument is, well, even if it wasn't good for the world, the alternatives would be worse. We don't have to live under a single superpower or a single empire. In fact, most of world history has not been a unipolar world. There is a benefit from balancing powers. And yes, that was tried in the 18th and 19th century, and it often produced wars, this idea that we were going to have a balance of powers and no one would be dominant. But it just simply is the fact that if you look at how many wars the United States has started, how many of the wars the United States has fueled, how many of the wars the United States has fought, how many of the proxy wars the United States fuels, so much of the world's violence emanates from the United States. And there have been empires in the past that would use wars to use it as conquest, take land, take assets, and for a while that can be fed, but ultimately even those empires collapse because it just becomes so sprawling and so unmanageable. And so I think that part of what is happening is this late stage empire that Trump is reacting to, and the recognition that most people in Washington have, but have been unwilling or afraid to express, that this cannot be sustained for much longer, that this needs to all be reined in. But I also think in the case of Trump, there is a real ideological conviction that most of what the United States does in the world when it comes to interfering in foreign countries, trying to control foreign countries, trying to start wars, is very bad for the United States, very bad for American citizens. I believe there's an ideological conviction there. And if you're on the left and you believe that impulse comes from a more paleo-conservative or right-wing or isolationist impulse, maybe you can find it disturbing, even if you think a left-wing version of that would be good, I guess, if you're really intent on not just demanding radical change, but demanding it in exactly the way that you want it, based on the exact premises that you want it. I don't really have that demand. I want to see the National Endowment for Democracy defunded and shut down. I want to see the CIA and the NSA and the FBI severely limited in the role that they play in the world. I want to see U.S. foreign policy far more oriented toward getting along with other countries rather than dominating them. and manipulating them and exploiting them. I want to see the military-industrial complex radically reduced so that it doesn't have an incentive as its only profit and power mechanism to constantly start and fuel wars. And whether this comes from this kind of an ideological perspective or that is far less important to me than the fact that it happened. And so when I see it happening, I'm going to be encouraged by it. I'm going to applaud it. I don't have a need to call the people doing it deviants and psychopaths or whatever. In fact, the first thing that we saw from Donald Trump was the imposition of a ceasefire that ended, at least for some time, the single worst expression of state violence I've seen in my lifetime, which is the absolutely nauseating, complete destruction of the society of Gaza and the lives of 2.2 million people by Israel, funded by the United States. That came to an end because of Donald Trump. You want to call people psychopaths and deviants and monsters, call the people who funded those things, which are the Democrats and the Biden administration. And certainly they didn't have opposition from the Republicans, but they were still the ones who did it and who stood up every day and defended it and financed it. And to me, the way that you judge a person is by the outcomes they produce. And so far, the primary outcome that Donald Trump has produced has been that ceasefire in Gaza, along with a serious attempt to end the war in Ukraine, what has put the United States on a path to clearly resolving that war sooner rather than later. And then at the same time, expressing a worldview that I think is very healthy and long overdue about the way in which the United States has tried to bully the world. Elon Musk said that the United States has been bullying the world, has been interfering in other countries, and we should start minding our own business. So whatever you think of the people who are doing it, and whatever you think of their motives, or whatever you think of the impulses that are driving it, seeing these things being done and hearing these things being said are things that I regard as extremely positive. And all along, from the very beginning, when I was far less negative about Trump and the emergence of Trump and the Trump movement than most people were who had been associated with the left, the reason for that is that I could hear and see this realignment. And so could neocons. Neocons left the Trump movement, were petrified. It did everything to sabotage it because they understood what I understood as well, which is that their project was endangered by a Trump-led Republican Party. And it was for exactly that reason, the reason that neocons hated him, that I found potential value in Trump and in the Trump movement and in the realignment that he could usher in, knowing that the Democratic Party would never deliver any of those things, that reforming the Democratic Party or trying to work within it or whatever was a fool's game. That was something I believed for a while and then saw the futility of it for so many reasons. And then with the emergence of Trump, it got even worse because they became defenders of establishment dogma and the institutions of authority. And so all the things that made the Democratic Party irrevocably rotted intensified a great deal. And I think you're seeing the wisdom of that view being vindicated in just the first weeks of the Trump administration. Thanks for watching this clip from System Update, our live show that airs every Monday through Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Rumble. You can catch the full nightly shows live or view the backlog of episodes for free on our Rumble page. You can also find full episodes the morning after they air across all major podcasting platforms, including Spotify and Apple. All the information you need is linked below. We hope to see you there.